Welcome to Washington Today for Monday, May 8th, 2023. I'm Gary Sterikoff. Thanks a lot for joining us today. The White House is once again calling on Congress to take action on gun safety, while the Texas legislature did just that, advancing a bill that would raise the age limit on certain gun purchases. The vote comes following this weekend's mass shooting in Allen, Texas, and protests from families of the victims of last year's shootings in Uvalde. A government employees union is suing President Biden and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen over the nation's debt limit law that they call, quote, unconstitutional. It comes a day before the White House meeting on the debt limit between President Biden and House and Senate leaders. And officials around the country are bracing for a migrant surge as pandemic-era immigration restrictions are set to expire this week. We begin at the White House in reaction from this weekend's mass shooting in Allen, Texas. Here's Press Secretary Kareem JeanPierre.
After the Louisville shooting in April, the president, as he did yesterday, called on Congress to ban assault weapons. He made clear, as you just did now, that this is a crisis. And he pointed to the previous executive actions that you just talked about. But we didn't really see anything else from the president. So if this is a crisis, why aren't we seeing the president talk about this more forcefully? Why isn't he out around in the country rallying people, putting pressure on members of Congress? When are we going to see that kind of engagement?
More than 24 executive actions that he's taken. More than any other president. More than any other president. He's been in the administration as president for a little bit more than 2 years. 24 actions that he's taken. He's had to visit, we're about to, sadly, have the anniversary of Buffalo shooting. And then Uvalde. 2 places that the president went to comfort the families who lost their children and who lost their loved ones. And from there, he continued to do the work. He signed, as I mentioned to Steve, as you all know, and covered, a bipartisan piece of legislation, the Safer Communities Act. So this is a president that has taken action. And the sad part, and I get the questions are coming to me as they should be, I am the spokesperson for the president, but where's Congress's responsibility on this? Where's their responsibility on this? We need legislation. It is frustrating, and I'm sure you all are frustrated too, to talk about this over and over again. Averaging out to one mass shooting a week? That's not okay.
But I guess the question is, other than saying in these statements after every mass shooting, Congress needs to do this, what is the president doing to actually get Congress to act? Because we don't see, from a public-facing perspective, much other than these statements as of late. And the president himself has said that he believes he's reached the extent of his executive authority.
Right. That's right. Congress needs to act. He's using his bully pulpit. He's been very, very clear, talked about it during the State of the Union, talked about it many times before, about the horrors of gun violence in our community, in our schools, in our temples, in our places of worship, as we continue to see. This is a president who has been incredibly vocal, and not just him, the vice president, the first lady. I mean, Jeremy, I appreciate the question, but Congress has to act. There has to be legislation coming from the other side of Pennsylvania Avenue. There has to be. 24 pieces of executive action in 2 years that this president has done. Historic. That is historic. So, look, I want the American people to know that this is an epidemic that, as they know themselves, some of them having suffered potentially gun violence in their community or in their families. This is a president that cares about making sure that their communities are safe and they feel safe with their kids going to school. So we're going to continue to use the bully pulpit. He's going to do that to call out Congress, and they have to act.
According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been more than 200 mass shootings in the U.S. so far this year. And according to multiple reports, the gunman in Allen was armed with an AR-15 style rifle. And investigators are looking into his potential extremist ties based on his social media presence and an insignia on his clothing. Meanwhile, in the Texas state capital of Austin, Democratic state lawmakers are speaking out over the gun safety proposals that they say have languished in the state legislature.
Ever since Uvalde, we've seen mass shootings across this nation, and cops come out and they tell you who died. They tell you who the shooter was. They tell you what the motivation was. And they do it all within 24 hours. Hell, they do it all within a few hours. And some of them show you the body cams that day. You saw that in Tennessee. You saw that in Chicago. You saw that in California. And you see it all the way all across this country. But you don't see it here. And you don't see it here because there's one man in a center office in this building that doesn't want you to see what's going on. And he tells his top cop, you're in control here, man. Keep it quiet. Don't tell people that the people that died in Allen, Texas were mostly minorities. Don't have that conversation because I'm going to go down to the border and blame Biden for some bull that's not existent, right? We can talk about that, but that's not what today's about. Today is about the reality, and the reality is that we are in a more dangerous state because Republicans have made it more dangerous. We are in a more dangerous state because of loose gun laws that allow everybody to walk down Congress with a gun, and a cop can't even ask you one question as to why. I promise you, if it was a black man or a brown man walking down Congress, they'd figure out something, wouldn't they, Ron?
That's right, they sure would.
And so that's what's happening in this country. That's what's happening in this state.
That's State Senator Roland Gutierrez. He represents Uvalde, the site of a mass shooting a year ago. Later in the afternoon, this was the scene at the Texas State Capitol. Families of Uvalde victims chanting, "Do your job, you cowards," as they called on state legislators to approve a bill that raises the age for certain gun purchases in the state to 21. That bill came before the Texas House Community Safety Select Committee today. Here's the chair of that committee, Republican Ryan Guillen, announcing the committee's final vote.
The chair now lays out as pending business by Chairman King. Members, this is the bill we heard previously. Chairman Canales offers up committee substitute. The committee substitute allows for transfers to an individual under 21 for certain circumstances. Is there objection to the adoption of the committee substitute? Chair hears none. Substitute is adopted. Representative Goodwin moves that House Bill 2744 as substituted be reported favorably to the full House with a recommendation that due pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Guillen?
Nay.
Vice Chair Johnson?
Aye.
Representative Bowers?
Aye.
Representative Burrows?
No.
Representative Canales?
100% aye.
Representative Orazio?
No.
Representative Goodwin?
Aye.
Representative Harless?
Aye.
Representative Holland?
Aye.
Representative King?
Aye.
Representative Landgraf?
No.
Representative Moody?
Aye.
Representative Frostclair?
No.
There being 8 ayes, 5 nays, and 0 present not voting, the motion.
Reaction after a Texas State Legislative House Committee approved to advance a bill that raises the age for certain gun purchases in the state to 21 years of age. 2 Republicans joined all committee Democrats in voting to advance the bill. It was sponsored by Democratic State Representative Tracy King, who represents Uvalde. And according to the Texas Tribune, the bill would have stopped the Uvalde shooter from purchasing a gun, but not the Allen shooter. And the Tribune also writing that the bill faces an uphill climb to become state law. But that today's vote marked a milestone for the proposal that relatives of the Uvalde shooting victims have been pushing for months. Back here in Washington, Congress returns tomorrow for legislative business and votes. The House gavels back in at 12 noon Eastern. Later in the week, lawmakers will consider the House Republicans' border security bill. The Senate is back in session at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. They will continue debating more of President Biden's executive nominations. And off the floor, House and Senate leaders are scheduled to meet with the president at the White House to talk about the federal debt limit. That happens tomorrow. And yesterday in New York City, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, one of the participants in tomorrow's meeting, talked about the impact of a debt default, including the possibility of Social Security being stopped for millions of people.
Default is going to have so many problems for so many people, but we're here to highlight one, and it's 3 words. Social Security shutdown. Pass a clean debt ceiling to avoid risk of great harm to seniors.
And this afternoon, a statement from Senator Schumer's office to C-SPAN saying that the majority leader has called a special caucus meeting for Senate Democrats to discuss gun violence and the path forward on gun safety legislation for this Thursday, May 11th. Back to that the meeting at the White House between the president and House and Senate leaders. Here's House Financial Services Committee Republican John Rose of Tennessee talking about the bill that House Republicans passed late last month. That bill paired a debt ceiling increase with federal spending cuts.
I mentioned the 10-year savings, but there are real savings in year one. Most notably, this would stop the president's student loan giveaway to the richest and wealthiest people in our country, that are going to have their student loans forgiven. And this would stop that. And it would also stop Biden hiring an army of IRS agents to come after middle America and harass them. And so there are real savings in year one here, and it sets us on a trajectory then that I think would be very promising. This is not the end of the story. This only extends the debt for $1.5 trillion or until next March, whichever comes first. And so, that is important to note because I think it sets the stage for us to get a second bite at the apple after next March 31st, or maybe before that, depending on how things go for the federal government. But remember, I think the most important message here is that Republicans are saying, here's a solution, here's a way to resolve this problem, avert a fiscal cliff, avoid default by this country, and the president and Chuck Schumer are now the ones on whose back that rests. If they don't act, if they don't come to the table, then this is on them. They're going to be the ones that cause the country to default. And to the extent that this roils the markets in the days ahead, it's on Joe Biden and Chuck Schumer.
House Financial Services Committee Republican John Rose of Tennessee speaking on WWTN Radio in Nashville. Also over the weekend, a group of 43 Republican senators led by Mike Lee of Utah said that they are, quote, united behind the House Republican Conference in support of spending cuts and structural budget reform as a starting point for negotiations on the debt ceiling. That's part of a letter that went to Senate Majority Leader Schumer. With more on that letter, here's Senator Lee.
As I've spoken to senator after senator putting this letter together, I've seen a degree of resolve that we haven't seen in a long time, which is a very favorable outcome for us. We're telling President Biden, look, we're not going to pass a clean debt ceiling increase. Want to raise the debt ceiling? It appears necessary from time to time to do that. So let's do it only with substantive spending reforms. Right. President Biden doesn't want to do that. But here's the catch, Steve. In the Senate, if any 41 senators don't want something to happen, they can effectively stop that legislation. Because it takes 60 votes to bring debate to a close, which you have to do in order to pass nearly all legislation, including this one. So we've told President Biden, look, we'll work with you, but it's not going to be free. Just as President Biden, as a senator, consistently, repeatedly asked for concessions in exchange for debt ceiling votes, we're insisting on it here, and that is not too much to ask, especially when the American people are hurting and suffering as a result of the inflation caused by excessive federal spending.
Senate Budget Committee Republican Mike Lee of Utah earlier today on Fox News. And here's Alex Ruhande, congressional correspondent for Newsweek, on the mood on Capitol Hill going into tomorrow's meeting between the president, Speaker McCarthy, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Senator Schumer, and Senate Republican Leader Mitch McConnell.
So the mood on Capitol Hill has really kind of been a wait and see. Last week, the House was out, the Senate was in, so a lot of my discussions with senators were based around kind of waiting to see what happens. On the Republican side, they've been deferential to the House and Speaker McCarthy, saying that the conversations belong largely between him and Biden, and we've seen Leader McConnell follow suit. On the Democratic side, they've also kind of been waiting to see what happens. The Leader Schumer and House Leader Jeffries have been saying that they want a clean limit, following in line with what the White House is saying. But you've also seen some worries on Capitol Hill if things are really going to get moving there. So the last week, I had some conversations with lawmakers about the 14th Amendment, which is sort of a legal theory that under that amendment, the Biden administration could lift the debt ceiling on itself. And Leader Durbin stressed the catastrophic effects that a default could have, and said he's open to options, essentially. And I also spoke with Judiciary Committee members and former AGs Richard Blumenthal and Senate Sheldon Whitehouse. And both of them, again, stressing that they'd like to see something done on a bipartisan level, but also kind of leaving the room open to see if something could get done there.
You also talked to Republicans. I think it was Senator Cruz, Ted Cruz, basically saying, as far as arguments go, or at least constitutional arguments for use, that there's some questions there.
Yes, I spoke with Senator Cruz, who's argued in front of the Supreme Court 9 times, and he said he doesn't see it as a viable argument, but also kind of stressed his thoughts that the White House wouldn't make such a move. And similarly, we saw on the Sunday shows, Secretary Janet Yellen was also pushing back on the idea that that would be an option there. And similarly, I spoke with progressives, Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren, who kind of stressed, let's have it be a wait and see before really talking about that as an option.
It was one of the other things, possibly from several fronts, or at least a possibility that could happen, is a short-term extension. Is there appetite for that?
We're not seeing a ton of appetite yet for that. They're really wanting to kind of get this done right now. And Republicans have been very forceful about wanting to wrap this up, get this moving ahead by that June deadline. So similarly, kind of Democrats have been saying this needs to get done now. We can't hold the country hostage. So we'll see how this shapes up, with this week starting really essentially on Tuesday and time running out.
With the players involved going to the White House, what are the expectations? Is Speaker McCarthy expecting something to happen that can move the process forward from President Biden?
Last time that the president and Speaker McCarthy had a meeting, we saw Speaker McCarthy kind of offering, positive sentiments, saying it was a productive meeting. Since then, they haven't publicly met since, so that tone has sort of shifted. So we don't really know what tone we might see coming out of this, especially with the sort of public posturing regarding, the Democrats' desire for a clean debt limit and the Republicans insistent on getting discretionary spending caps and other budget cuts.
You mentioned the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. How much of the tone changed amongst the players involved when she mentioned that June 8th deadline? What changed, if anything, as far as the intensity, or at least the desire to make something happen?
Well, it seemed to kind of heat up the climate on Capitol Hill, especially among reporters that are, really trying to see what's going to be happening here. But among lawmakers themselves, it hasn't changed the tone a ton. Senate Democrats are largely saying the same things that they were before. This could be catastrophic, pointing to a Moody's report that this could result in a mild recession, a loss of 1 million jobs. And similarly, Republicans are saying, we still need to use this as a tool to negotiate. And I also heard conversations on Capitol Hill among a number of Republican members that are not totally sure whether they believe what Secretary Yellen is saying, kind of casting her as a member of the administration.
We knew what happened as far as Speaker McCarthy is concerned. The constituency has to deal with, especially with his speaker electionship. How are they hanging together on this?
They are. It's tough here because we have the more conservative members, the Freedom Caucus types, that are really saying that some of them didn't even agree to support this measure. Congressman Ken Buck, a founding member of the Freedom Caucus, didn't vote for this deal that the Republicans passed, saying it didn't go far enough. So McCarthy, with the concessions he made, is really kind of in a bind here. He needs to kind of stay firm, show he's really pressing a negotiation here. But among the conservative members of his conference, we're likely to see a lot of pushback if he does concede a lot of ground here.
And I imagine Senator Schumer also has constituencies or at least numbers to look at as well, particularly in light of this letter that was issued by Republicans saying they totally support what's going on with House Republicans on this.
Yes, it was something 43 Senate Republicans put their names on this letter that was led by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, saying that they are behind the effort from the House Republicans. So again, they need 60. The Democrats would need 60 votes to advance a clean debt limit, and that letter's indicating that that's not going to happen. So again, Schumer's kind of been put in this sort of tough position here, where he's staying firm on his hopes for a clean limit, but then we're not really seeing a viable path just yet.
Newsweek congressional correspondent Alex Ruhande on Washington Journal this morning. You can see more from that segment at cspan.org/Washington Journal and on the C-SPAN Now video app. And more on that lawsuit filed by the National Association of Government Employees. According to thehill.com, it contends that if the debt limit is reached, President Biden and Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen would be forced to decide which payments to prioritize, and that would violate the separation of powers by taking over Congress's spending authority. The union represents nearly 75,000 federal employees and says that its members are at imminent risk of layoff or furlough once the debt limit is reached. It was filed in Massachusetts federal trial court today. The lawsuit also states that federal debts must be paid under the 14th Amendment, which states, quote, "The validity of the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned." You're listening to Washington Today.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We tape it right here in the C-SPAN studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get all the attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history. From what's new and happening right now, relive the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN podcast, The Weekly. Find it wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today. The Biden administration announced today new rules that aim to help air travelers cover their meals and hotel rooms if they are stranded for reasons within an airline's control. That would come in addition to ticket refunds when the airline is at fault for a flight being canceled or significantly delayed. With more, here's the president on the announcement.
Proud to announce two critical steps that my administration is taking to protect American air passengers. First, we just launched a new website, flightsright.gov, flightsright.gov. It features a dashboard we created last fall to give travelers more transparency into airlines' compensation policies. So, if it's the airline's fault and your flight was canceled or delayed, you can check the dashboard to see how the airline should be compensating you, like rebooking a flight or accommodating your hotel room and your meals. And today, we've expanded that dashboard to include airlines guaranteeing additional compensation, like cash, miles, or travel vouchers. But here's the deal. If you look at the dashboard today, you'll find that only 2 airlines guarantee additional compensation beyond the ticket refund. If your flight is very delayed or canceled, and the airline could have prevented that from, you deserve more than just getting the price of your ticket. You deserve to be fully compensated. Your time matters. The impact on your life matters. That's why I'm announcing a second critical step today to protect American consumers. Later this year, my administration will propose a historic new rule that will make it mandatory, not voluntary, but mandatory, for all U.S. airlines to compensate you with meals, hotels, taxis, ride shares, and rebooking fees, and cash, miles, and/or travel vouchers whenever they're the ones to blame for the cancellation or delay. And that's all on top of refunding the cost of your ticket. Airline passengers in Canada, for example, the European Union, and other places already get these compensations. And guess what? It works.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who also appeared at the event, said the rules should help travelers with flight cancellations and long delays caused by things such as mechanical issues with the plane or a lack of crew. Officials at the southern border and around the country are bracing for the expiration of a pandemic-era border restriction this week known as Title 42. Now, last week, the Biden administration announced it was sending 1,500 troops to the U.S.-Mexico border for 90 days. That adds to a total of 4,000 military personnel assigned to assisting border officials with various non-law enforcement tasks. And according to Axios, quote, the U.S. is also opening new processing centers in Colombia and Guatemala, which will allow migrants to be pre-screened for lawful pathways such as asylum, refugee status, or parole before adding to the crowding at the border. This week, House Republicans plan to vote on the newly introduced Secure the Border Act of 2023. The bill would reinstate several of former President Trump's most controversial border policies. And here's White House Press Secretary Kareem JeanPierre, who says the administration is confident it's doing everything it can to manage any border surge.
We are confident that with the tools that we have in front of us, that we are doing everything that we can. We have a robust multi-agency plan to humanely manage the border through enforcement, deterrence, and diplomacy. And we're implementing that plan with our regional partners, using the few tools we have remaining because, again, Congress has failed to act. The president has taken action on this issue of the border since day one. And what we're seeing from Republican officials, what we're seeing from Congress, Republicans in Congress, is they want to play politics. That's what they want to do. They want to play politics and actually not deal with an issue that has challenged us for decades. This is nothing new, but it has challenged us for decades. And so the president is doing everything that he can in his power, but he needs Congress to act.
America's cities are also making plans for an immigrant surge. In New York City, Mayor Eric Adams is facing criticism for a plan that he has to send hundreds of asylum seekers to 2 hotels north of the city for up to 4 months. According to Spectrum News New York One, Mayor Adams' administration plans to send up to 300 single adult men under the city's care on a volunteer basis to hotels in Rockland and Orange counties. Now, that announcement has raised the ire of one member of New York's congressional delegation, Republican Mike Lawler, who represents the area.
New York City chose to be a sanctuary city, and so you've had a lot of governors and mayors and small town elected officials shipping migrants up to New York City. And now the city, who has taken in about 60,000 migrants, is at capacity. And so they're deciding to do the very thing that they were decrying just a few months ago. Mayor Adams called it morally bankrupt. And now he is choosing to send migrants to areas like Rockland County, which do not have the infrastructure nor the capabilities to handle that big of an influx of migrants in need of services. The mayor is saying, oh, we're going to pay for it for 4 months. Well, after the 4 months expire, who's paying for it? Have any of these people been vetted? Does anybody know their backgrounds? And the answer is obviously no. And so, this hotel in question is less than a mile from 2 universities, school, and you have 340 single adult male migrants being sent here. It's totally unacceptable. There was no communication or coordination. It was just being told, the county executive and the town supervisor, this is what's happening. That's not the way you, as a colleague in government.
But Congressman, I want to come back to my initial question. As a region here, as people who are meant to care for their neighbors, isn't there some sense that Rockland County might be able to share in that burden?
No. Rockland County.
You literally 100% don't care about these people.
Oh, Pat, don't say that. That's
I'm asking.
Pat, respectfully, don't put words in my mouth.
Okay.
Respectfully. All right. Rockland County did not choose to be a sanctuary city. New York City did. New York City chose to allow for this to happen by asking people, yeah, you can come here, no problem. Rockland County has a large immigrant population. We have those who are here seeking asylum. We have a large Haitian community, TPS. So this is not about being against immigration. This is about recognizing that this policy does not work. You cannot have a sanctuary city policy and then decry it when you get overwhelmed. All right. So number one, New York City should reverse its sanctuary city status. Number two, we need to secure our border. We cannot continue to allow tens of thousands of migrants to come into the United States and then put that burden, that share, onto municipalities all across the country.
Republican Mike Lawler of New York appearing on Spectrum News New York 1 today. He sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Officials in Ukraine issued a nationwide air alert today following Russian missile strikes on Sunday night into Monday morning. The capital of Kiev was among the locations targeted by the missile strikes. The Washington Post reporting today that the strikes come as Russian authorities controlling the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine are preparing to evacuate about 3,100 people from areas in and around the facility. With more, here's State Department spokesman Vedant Patel.
A couple of pictures. Let me start with Ukraine. Last night was the heaviest, most intense, I would say, drone attack on Kiev since early this year. Do you have any reaction to the fact that Russians are shifting and re-targeting Kiev again?
What I'll say, Alex, is that this is just another line item in the litany of list of Russian aggression on Ukraine. You saw me speak to this a little bit last week, but there was an instant in which Kiev and Ukraine were subject to numerous missiles and drones, and this kind of action and activity is just unacceptable and another example of the Russian aggression.
The last couple of days, let's say, have they changed your calculus on Wagner? The fact that they announced they're going to leave and they stayed to probably to spin our heads about their tactics. Has there been any change in terms of recognizing Wagner Group as a terrorist group as it is?
We have, as you know, Alex, we have designated the Wagner Group, as a transnational threat group. That we've previously done that because we continue to believe that the group is largely motivated by profit, not motivated by fame or some of these other things that are made when assessments are happening for a potential FTO designation. What I will also say is that we know that the Wagner Group, when they are active in a country, that country is less stable, less secure. It often finds its natural resources and minerals exploited upon. But the important thing to remember here, Alex, is that this conflict has not gone to plan according to Putin. The Russian Federation has had to scrape around for additional personnel for this conflict. Now they are relying on the Wagner Group and its band of ex-convicts to do much of this work. And rather for Putin to withdraw from Ukraine and stop the needless loss of life, the Russian Federation has chosen time and time again to escalate. And this, unfortunately, we are seeing that wreak havoc across Ukraine, including on Kiev, as you so mentioned. So the United States will continue to take steps to support our Ukrainian partners. As I said, we announced a drawdown late last week, and will continue to take steps to hold the Russian Federation accountable.
Deputy State Department spokesman Vedant Patel speaking earlier today. You can find the entire briefing at cspan.org, which is also where you can find this program as a podcast, specifically on our podcast page at cspan.org/podcasts. You can also find it wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like more on the stories that are shaping Washington, subscribe to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, word for word. Go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Every day we take your calls live on the air on the news of the day, and we discuss policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll discuss the latest on tomorrow's meeting between President Biden and congressional leadership on raising the debt limit and avoiding a potential default with Bloomberg News White House reporter Josh Wingrove and Politico budget and appropriations reporter Caitlin Emma. Watch Washington Journal live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN or on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app. Join the discussion all morning with your phone calls, Facebook comments, texts, and tweets.